Hey guys, tonight we slip into the soft folds of velvet, bask in royal colors, and then immediately gag at the smell, because we are going deep into the medieval world of snail-based fabric dyeing. Yes, snails. Not cute garden ones either. I am talking about murex snails, sharp, reclusive sea creatures with a scent profile somewhere between dead squid and toe fungus. You are standing ankle deep in the shallows of the Mediterranean coast. It is early morning, the kind where the sky blushes pink, but you are already sweating. Around you, fishermen grumble and mutter, their nets drooping with uncooperative sea creatures. You are not after fish, though. You are after snails, thousands of them. Tiny, slimy, hard-shelled treasure chests that hide a single precious drop of fluid inside. This is Tyrian purple, and you are about to suffer for fashion. The beach is more of a work site than a paradise. Stone basins, piles of broken shells, flies everywhere. This is where dreams of royalty begin, with a smell so thick it feels like it is coating your lungs. The reek of decay, seawater, and something chemical. You cannot put your finger on it, but you know it is never coming out of your tunic. And surprise, you probably will not survive this. Between infection, exposure, and chronic gagging, snail dyeing is not a long-term career move. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are listening from a cozy bed somewhere, drop your location and local time in the comments. I would love to see who is drifting off to sleep while learning about medieval fabric fluids. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch beside a rock pool. The snails do not exactly leap into your hands. Murex brandaris, to be specific, one of 3 species used for this dye. You need hundreds for just 1 ounce of usable color, sometimes thousands. They cling to rocks, burrow in sand, and make you work for it. Your basket fills slowly as your back begins to ache. Your fingers pick up little cuts, and you start to question your life choices. By the way, the ancient city of Tyre, where this whole mess gets its name, built an empire on this dye. It was their claim to fame, their economic engine, their pungent pride. Tyrian purple, a shade so exclusive it got name-dropped in Homer's Iliad. Historians still argue whether the process began there, or if it migrated from earlier cultures like the Minoans, who also had a suspicious love for shellfish and color. You are not alone on the beach. Small children help pry snails from rocks with little sticks. Women boil seawater and clean baskets. Dogs bark at the surf. Occasionally, a shout goes up when someone finds a particularly big snail. What passes for workplace excitement here? There is a kind of rhythm to it all, a tide-shaped economy. Some workers say you have to catch the snails during mating season because their glands are fuller then. Others say moonlight matters. Still others just shrug and say, if it smells bad enough, it will work. This is not exactly a standardized science. Recipes vary from region to region, even from family to family. There is a story, half legend, half joke, that Hercules' dog discovered Tyrian purple when it bit into a snail and came home with a purple muzzle. Whether you believe that or not, the fact is, this color was a happy biochemical accident. A snail, exposed to air and light, oxidizes its glandular secretion into something intensely vivid and strangely stable, for ancient dye anyway. You sling your basket onto your shoulder and begin the hike back up the beach. The weight is nothing compared to the stench. Already the snails are dying. They must be processed fast, or their enzymes will break down, ruining the potential dye. You are in a race against rot. The work never really ends. Dyeing with snails is a full-time, full-body, full-nose affair. And yes, medieval people knew how bad it was. There are Roman texts describing the workshops as intolerable. So you are not just being dramatic. Pliny the Elder, ever the buzzkill, claimed the smell could knock out a cow. Fringe researchers even theorized that workers were paid hazard wages or worked in short shifts to avoid long-term exposure. There is no glamour here, only grit. Purple, later associated with kings and clergy, begins in blood and salt. In the corners of your vision, gulls circle. You see men cracking shells with rocks, greenish goo spurting out. Tomorrow you will join them, but for tonight, you sleep with hands raw from seawater and a head full of the sea's most royal stink. You wake up to the calls of gulls and the gentle lap of the tide. If gentle means loud enough to remind you that your back still hurts from yesterday, your hands are already stiff from gripping baskets, and your nose has not forgiven you for the trauma, but no rest. The snails do not collect themselves. Today, you are back at it, catching the murex. It is a surprisingly strategic process. The snails are most active in rocky intertidal zones, those slippery, seaweed-crusted stretches that make you regret every confident step. You ease your way across the rocks, slipping a little, your sandals soggy and full of grit. You crouch low and start prying. The murex are clever than they look. They hide in crevices and under flat stones, sticking themselves down like little mollusk glue traps. They are thorny too, literally. Their shells bristle with spikes, and pulling them off without slicing your fingers takes practice. You reach in, twist, wiggle, and hope they do not shatter. One bad move, and you crush the shell before you even reach the dye gland, which would be wasteful, tragic, and very, very smelly. Some days, you get lucky. A tide pool full of snails, just hanging out like they are waiting to be made into fashion history. Other times, you can go hours without finding more than a few. And remember, it takes roughly 10,000 snails to dye a single Roman toga. You are not going to be finished anytime soon. Ancient fishermen often resented this side hustle. While fishing brought food to the table, snail gathering was a labor of love or desperation. Not every town had the patience for dyeing, but the ones that did became famous for it. Sidon, Arwad, and of course Tyre, coastal cities that turned their geography into a smelly gold mine. Here is your quirky tidbit of the day. Some medieval dye workers would actually farm murex snails in enclosed saltwater pools, basically medieval aquaculture, centuries ahead of its time. Whether this worked well or was more of a desperate plan B? Historians still argue. Some say the snails refused to breed in captivity. Others insist they were fed carefully curated shellfish diets to optimize gland fluid. You might not know who is right, but your aching feet definitely vote for tide pool hunting to be replaced with snail farming. As you trudge along the coast, you glance at your gathering bag. Maybe 200 so far. At best, that will produce enough dye for a handkerchief. If the snails are healthy, if they were caught at the right time, if the air is dry and the vat cooperates, you get used to disappointment in this job. There is a rhythm to the day, though. One person gathers snails, another cracks them, a third oversees the dye vat. It is a relay race of medieval industry, and if you drop the baton or the snail, the whole batch can be ruined. One bad snail can taint the mixture. Too much seawater, and the pH changes. Too little sun, and the color never develops. Honestly, it is starting to feel like purple is cursed. Sometimes, kids are sent to do the collecting. Smaller hands, more agility on the rocks. Plus, if anyone is going to bounce back from a fall into cold seawater, it is a 9-year-old. You glance over and see a gang of them chattering in whispers, daring each other to pick up the biggest, slimmiest murex. You smile in spite of the stink. Once you have filled your basket, it is time to rinse the snails. Not for cleanliness. Nothing here will ever be clean, but to remove debris and sand. You dip them in a large clay basin of briny water and swish them gently. Some of the snails squirm, still alive, which, depending on who you ask, is either essential or totally unnecessary. Historians still argue whether the glands had to be extracted fresh for optimal dye potency, or if you could store them short-term without losing color strength. You are not exactly spoiled for scientific tools out here. Just your fingers, a knife, and maybe a bone pick. The beach has turned into a grisly little snail morgue. Rows of buckets, cracked shells, murex stacked like war casualties. But you feel a weird sort of pride, each one a step closer to that elusive royal purple. To keep the snails from dying too quickly, you occasionally splash a bit of seawater over them. They hiss and retract into their shells. Honestly, the sound is not unlike that of someone being grossed out. You relate. Despite everything, you marvel for a moment. These creatures, small and hideous, have powered a global status symbol for millennia. Emperors, bishops, even pirates have killed to control this dye. Think of Cleopatra. Her robes were lined in it. Julius Caesar famously passed a law-making Tyrian purple exclusive to the imperial wardrobe. Just imagine the Roman HR meeting for that one. You haul your basket back to camp. You smell like you fought a sea monster and lost. But your basket is full. Tomorrow, you crack. Tomorrow, you smear. Tomorrow, you enter the part of the process where your neighbors start avoiding you on the street. For now, though, you rinse your hands in seawater and let the sun warm your face. Just a little longer before the smell sets in for good. The sun is barely up, but you are already hunched over a flat rock, a blunt mallet in your hand, and a growing pile of broken shells at your feet. Today is shell cracking day, and it is just as unpleasant as it sounds. No worse. Imagine a symphony of crunching, splattering, and gagging, conducted by someone with a personal vendetta against your sense of smell. That is your morning. You pick up your first murex snail. It is still alive, just barely, antennae retracted in protest. You aim the mallet, trying to hit just the right spot. Too light, and the snail remains intact. Too hard, and the whole thing explodes into an unhelpful mess. You crack it, crunch, and pry apart the jagged pieces with your fingers. Inside is a mix of gunk, dark brown slime, pale meat, and if you are lucky, a tiny glint of pearlescent fluid. That is the prize. That is your dye gland. Over the next few hours, this becomes your rhythm. Crack, split, scrape, repeat. The smell intensifies with every blow. It is like a fish market collided with a compost heap in midsummer. The kind of stench that crawls into your teeth. You stop even trying to avoid it. You just breathe through your mouth and accept your fate. Fun fact: medieval dye workers were sometimes forced to live in designated quarters far from town centers. Not because they were criminals, just because nobody wanted to live downwind of them. As the pile of shattered shells grows, you notice how beautiful some of them are. Purplish veins, golden edges. It is a weird moment. How something so foul can still be accidentally lovely. You keep working, your fingers sticky with snail guts, occasionally nicking your knuckles on sharp fragments. Some dye masters believe that the shells should be cracked only under certain weather conditions. Too humid, and the glands rot too fast. Too cold, and the dye refuses to develop. One 13th century manual advises doing the work on a day when the clouds are lazy. Whatever that means. Historians still argue whether those cryptic weather instructions were grounded in chemistry or just old-fashioned superstition. Either way, you hope the clouds cooperate. You glance around the worksite. The whole crew is silent, except for the rhythmic cracking. There is a strange solemnity to it, like you are performing some kind of sacred violence. Which, in a way, you are. After all, you are helping create a color so tied to power and mystery that even now, in the modern world, the word royal gets slapped on it like a brand. But let us be real. Right now, you are mostly worried about not slicing your thumb open with a snail shard. Eventually, the really fun part starts: sorting. Because not every snail yields a usable gland. Some are dry, some are crushed, some have already decomposed too much. You have to identify the hypobranchial gland. Yes, that is its real name, which is nestled deep inside the upper whorl of the snail's body. It looks like a tiny white sac, no bigger than a grain of rice, and it is surrounded by unappetizing goo. You use a dull knife to tease it free. Sometimes it squirts. Sometimes it tears. Sometimes it just vanishes into the rest of the slime. And sometimes you second-guess your entire career path. The glands go into a separate bowl, usually clay or bronze. They must be kept cool and moist, or the enzymes will break down too quickly. In some towns, dye workers kept them on damp moss. Others buried the glands in sand or wrapped them in damp cloth. One weird method, found in a 14th century text from Sicily, recommend storing them in old beer barrels, not for preservation, but to keep the smell from attracting rats, a problem you really had not considered until just now. Every so often, you hear a yelp from a fellow worker, shell splinter to the eye, crushed fingers. It happens. The work is brutal, tedious, and a little dangerous. That said, some guilds considered it elite labor. Purple dye workers were sometimes exempt from certain taxes. They had trade secrets, special tools, and guarded recipes. Even if you reeked, you were still part of something prestigious. And here is the kicker. No matter how careful you are, no matter how well you extract the glands, the success of the dye still depends on a dozen variables you cannot control. Is the water too salty? Was that batch of urine too old? Did you ferment the snail goo long enough? There is no test strip, no thermometer, just your nose, your eyes, and years of trial and error. You stretch your back and shake out your arms. Your bowl of glands is half full, which is pretty good. It will make maybe a few ounces of dye once processed. Enough for a ceremonial sash. Definitely not enough for a full robe. You would need a whole week of labor and a few more workers to produce that. You notice a few snails that slipped your knife earlier. You go back, more experienced now, slicing them open with faster hands, your movements almost automatic. You have become a small, sticky cog in a big purple machine. Evening comes, and the sun casts long gold shadows over your worksite. The shells glint in the fading light, and for a moment, everything almost looks beautiful. Almost. Then a gust of wind wafts the smell straight into your face. And nope, still horrific. You dump your cracked shells into the refuse pile, careful not to trip over the jagged mound. This is your third pile this week. Some towns recycled the calcium into plaster or cement. Others just dumped it into the sea and let the crabs sort it out. You wonder what the ocean must think of all this. Your hands are purple stained and sore. Your nose has quit out of protest. But tomorrow, you start fermenting. And that, my friend, is where things get really disgusting. It is early, but not bright. The sun barely filters through the haze, as if the sky itself is trying to stay away from what you are about to do. Today, the glands ferment. And if you thought cracking snails was unpleasant, welcome to the main event. This is the part that makes people leave town. This is the part where you start to question your place in history and hygiene. You begin by transferring your carefully collected snail glands into a wide-mouthed vat, clay or bronze, if you are lucky, lined with pitch if you are not. You mash them. That is right. You do not just drop them in and walk away. You crush them with a paddle or heavy spoon, breaking them down into a slimy, bubbling paste. Some call it mucus. Others prefer pulp. You call it, please let this be over soon. The smell hits you like a betrayal. It is not just bad, it is wrong. Rotting fish mixed with fermented eggs and something oddly sweet. You gag a little, but keep going. You are not allowed to stop. Medieval dye vats do not come with pause buttons. You add just enough seawater to thin the mix, but not too much. Too much dilutes the enzymes that activate the color. The key is balance. A murky soup that feels alive, and just slightly evil. Fun historical fact. In some texts, this mixture is referred to as purple milk, a poetic name for what is clearly a potion brewed in the cauldron of nightmares. Once the glands are mashed and stirred, you cover the vat and let nature take over. Heat is crucial. The fermentation only works at a warm, stable temperature, around 30 degrees Celsius, or as close as you can manage in a world without thermometers. Some dye houses built special brick enclosures around the vats, insulating them with straw or even dung. Yes, dung. Because apparently the smell of rotting snail pulp was not enough. You check the vat every few hours. You stir it gently, aerate the top, and pray it does not turn black. A greenish tinge is a good sign. A rainbow-like sheen is excellent. But black means something went wrong. Too much heat, too much water, or the glands were spoiled. Historians still argue whether it was better to ferment the mixture for 1 day or 10. Some say quick exposure preserved the brightest hues. Others swear by long fermentations for deeper saturation. As usual, you do not get to choose. You just watch and wait. You add urine. Let that sentence sit for a second, because you are going to do it. And it is going to smell exactly like it sounds. Human urine, aged, warm, collected in clay jars from households around the village. It is added for its ammonia, which helps release the dye from the glands and shift the pigment chemically toward purple. In some regions, only the urine of adult males was considered acceptable. In others, women were preferred, based on bizarre ideas about body heat or internal temperament. A 12th century monk in Provence even swore that monks who drank red wine produced the most royal fermentation. No one wants to test that theory today. You stir again, slower now, as the mixture begins to bubble. Not with heat, there is no boiling here, but with gases from the fermentation. Think of it like brewing beer, only instead of barley and hops, you are using snail organs and pee. Every stir sends up a puff of scent that clings to your hair, your eyelashes, your soul. You hear a buzzing, flies. They know a party when they smell one. You slap them away and keep going. Here is the strangest thing. It works. After a day or two, the fluid begins to change color. It starts off murky brown, then shifts to greenish blue, then, finally, in the right light, under the right breeze, purple. Real, royal, unmistakable purple. At first just a trace, then blooming like ink on wet paper. It is alive. It is magic. It is biology and alchemy, disgust and beauty, all in one. You are exhausted, but you cannot look away. It feels like witnessing a miracle, except the miracle is floating in fermented snail guts. You fish out a small thread of wool and dip it in, gently, reverently. You swirl it for a moment, then lift it out. At first, it looks green, a disappointment. But then, slowly, as the oxygen hits it, it oxidizes. The green darkens, warms, deepens. You watch, wide-eyed, as the thread transforms into a dusky violet, then richer, then regal, like watching royalty rise from the muck. And here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval dye masters whispered that the fermentation could be influenced by the moon. Full moons produced brighter shades, new moons, duller ones. A superstition? Maybe. But you bet your last unspoiled nostril someone out there kept a lunar calendar pinned beside their vat. Fermentation continues for several more days. You monitor the mix, keep it warm, and make sure nothing grows in it that should not. Sometimes, rogue bacteria crash the party. Sometimes a curious cat falls in. There's a reason vats were often covered, not just to trap the smell, but to protect the sanctity of the slime. Once you are satisfied with the color depth, you let the mixture rest. Let it cool. Let the solid settle. You are nearly there. You skim the top, and what remains is dye. Real, usable, high status. Worth its weight in gold dye. All that labor, all that stench, all those cursed snails. And now, in your hand, a jar of purple that could buy a bishop's hat. But do not celebrate just yet. Tomorrow, you dye the fabric, and that is a whole new mess. You wake up sore, stained, and still mildly offended by your own scent. But today is the day, dye day. No more snail cracking. No more fermentation roulette. You have your precious purple fluid, finally. It is murky, smells like a punishment, but it glows with promise. This is what emperors used to fight wars over. And you? You are going to soak some fabric in it and hope for the best. You begin by preparing your textiles. Wool is the most common in this age, thick, forgiving, and eager to absorb pigment. Linen and cotton, too smooth. Silk, too expensive for practice. Wool, though? Wool is your friend. Scratchy, honest, and just porous enough to give you a fighting chance at a rich hue. You rinse it thoroughly, scrubbing it in cool water. Dirt and grease repel dye, and you are not about to waste this snail brew on dirty cloth. You hang the wool briefly to dry, just enough to take off the dripping wetness. Damp, not drenched. Now for the dye bath. You pour the fermented liquid into a broad, shallow basin, often bronze or lead-lined wood. Some are buried in the ground, like creepy hot tubs. You stir it gently, trying not to disturb the settled gunk at the bottom. This is not a smoothie. This is precision work. And here is a funny little historical nugget. Some medieval dye workers believed that women should not be present during this stage. Not for modesty, oh no, but because they thought menstruating women could ruin the color by just standing nearby, disrupting the ether, they said. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a cover for controlling trade secrets. Either way, your medieval coworker might politely suggest you take your lunch break somewhere else. You lower the first bundle of wool into the vat. Slowly, it sinks with a soft splash, bubbles rising as the fabric drinks up the dye. You poke it down with a stick. No bare hands. It is not just gross, it is dangerous. That liquid is acidic. Plus, you really do not want purple fingernails for a month. You swirl the fabric gently, evenly. The trick is time. Not too fast, not too long. Dye too short, and the color fades in a week. Dye too long, and it turns brownish or oversaturated. The real pros? They can tell by smell one whiff, and they say, "Yep, 3 more minutes." You are not quite there yet. You are still at the "oh, was that fart smell new?" level of experience. Pulling the fabric out is the moment of truth. The wool is green again. Always green at first. A dull, wet seaweed color that looks like disappointment. But you wait. You hold it up to the light. Air hits it. Slowly, steadily, the green shifts. A murmur of blue, then violet, then finally, that unmistakable hue, the one that whispers of palaces, coronations, and taxes so high only the king could afford this look. You feel your heart stutter a little. You did it. You hang the fabric on a wooden rack, letting it drip. You want airflow, shade, and time. Sunlight will ruin the dye. Even a single ray can bleach the magic right out of it. Most dyers dry their work under canopies or inside vented sheds. No breezes allowed. No prying eyes either. In some places, dye vats were kept under lock and key. Because if someone stole your technique, your recipe, or your purple stained wool, you were ruined. You go again. Another bundle of wool. Another dip. Another transformation. Each one slightly different. No two purples are identical, not even in the same batch. Temperature, fabric thickness, the age of the snails, the heat of your hands, all of it changes the outcome. This is not mass production. This is alchemy meets trial and error and a lot of smell. Oh, and remember that mainstream historical fact? Here you go. During the height of the Byzantine Empire, only the emperor was allowed to wear clothing dyed entirely with Tyrian purple. It was literally illegal for anyone else. Violators could be imprisoned, fined, or worse. That is how serious this color was. As your wool dries, you start to see the subtle spectrum. Some strips glow like plum wine. Others lean redder, like the inside of a figure one even has a strange silvery sheen. An accident, maybe, or a perfect mistake. You smile. You are beginning to understand the obsession. And just as you are feeling good, your dye master calls out. You forgot to strain the last batch. The gunk, tiny snail bits, dissolved shell, old moss, is still in the vat. If left overnight, it could ruin the whole mixture. So back you go. You fetch a sieve, often made of horsehair, or tightly woven reeds, and begin the delicate work of filtering the fluid. This part is weirdly satisfying, like skimming a swamp for treasure. You catch bits of crushed snail gland and watch them glisten before tossing them into the refuse bucket. Some dye workers reused that bucket for compost. Others believed it had magical properties and buried it under trees. You mostly just want to never smell it again. Filtering done, you look at your vat and feel oddly proud. The purple is dark now, concentrated. You might even get a third or fourth use out of it before the enzymes give out. Some lucky batches lasted for weeks. Others, one bad stir, and poof, ruined. As night falls, you gather your dyed wool, still damp, still reeking faintly of the sea. You fold it carefully. You will rinse it in a few days, once the color has fully set. For now, it rests, glowing like treasure in the dim light. You wonder who will wear this. A bishop? A baron's daughter? Someone getting married? Someone getting crowned? Or maybe it just lines a tapestry hidden in a grand hall where candles flicker and no one knows what you went through to make this magic happen. You breathe deep, forgetting the smell for just a moment. Purple, real purple, from Snails. You did that. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, you fix it. Because unless you want all that effort to wash away in the first rainstorm, you're going to need a little something called mordant. You wake up with fingers still smelling like brine and regret. The dyeing is done, mostly. But before you can claim your purple prize and prance off into the medieval sunset, you must do one more crucial thing: fix the color. That means using a mordant, not a medieval curse word, though it certainly sounds like one. A mordant is a fixative, a substance that helps the dye bind permanently to the fabric. No mordant, no staying power. Your royal wool would fade faster than a merchant's promise. So, what do you use? Well, if you are fortunate, and fortunate is relative, you have access to alum, a naturally occurring mineral salt. Powdery, pale, and reliable, alum is the go-to mordant across much of Europe. If you are in a wealthier workshop, you might also experiment with iron salts, or even tannin-rich plant extracts like oak galls. Each one has its quirks. Alum gives brightness. Iron darkens everything a bit, sometimes beautifully, sometimes like a whetstone. Tannins, well, they are temperamental, just like you before breakfast. You dissolve your chosen mordant into water, warming it slightly. Too hot, and the wool shrinks. Too cold, and it does not absorb well. You stir carefully, almost reverently. The wool has to be soaked in this bath for hours, sometimes overnight, depending on how deep you want that purple to stay. This is where the real commitment happens. Until now, it has been romance. Here, it becomes marriage. You lower your first bundle of wool into the mordant bath. The liquid turns cloudy as the minerals interact with residual dye and lanolin from the wool. You stir gently, allowing each fiber to fully saturate. It is not exciting work. No dramatic color shifts. No bubbling cauldrons. But it is necessary, and you can feel it, the way the cloth slowly transforms, not in shade, but in permanence. Here is a historical fact that might surprise you. Some medieval cities actually regulated mordant usage through guild laws. In Florence and Venice, dyers who skipped the mordant stage could lose their license. That is how seriously this step was taken. A single bolt of faded cloth could ruin a reputation. As you stir, you think about how this moment affects everything down the line. A fabric improperly mordanted might look fine at first, but over time, it fades to gray. Worse, the dye could rub off on the wearer's skin. Imagine walking into court with purple elbows and trying to explain that to a judge. Mordanting is not glamorous, but it is the line between temporary art and lasting prestige. Now, on a quirky tidbit, in some North African dye houses, especially those working with both indigo and purple, there were elaborate rituals around mordanting. Workers would chant or recite prayers during the soak, believing that steady breath and focused thoughts improved the bonding process. Was it about chemistry? Vibration? Or just keeping apprentices too busy to gossip? Historians still argue whether these rituals had symbolic, spiritual, or purely practical origins. You let the wool rest in the mordant bath. Time slows. You watch tiny bubbles rise and drift like sleepy ghosts. You begin to see why older dye masters seemed so serene. This part is less about strength and more about patience. You cannot rush the bond. You just wait, stir, watch, breathe. When the wool finally emerges from the bath, it is a little heavier, a little rougher, but you know the difference is in its core. The dye will hold now against sun, sweat, time. You rinse the bundles gently in clean water, not too much, just enough to clear away the mineral film. The water runs faintly purple, then clearer, then clean. You nod. That is what you want to see. Now the wool must dry again, but this time it dries with confidence. You hang it in soft shade, out of the wind. The fibers glisten slightly, like velvet touched by moonlight. You run your hand along the edge of a tunic panel. The color does not smear. It does not flake. It is there, fixed, real. And here is a whisper of superstition. In the island workshops of the Levant, some believed that cloth mordanted under a waxing moon would resist fading longer. Others said mordants worked best when mixed with spring water fetched before dawn. Strange beliefs? Maybe. But after everything you have done so far, are you really going to doubt a full moon rinse? As your cloth dries for the final time, you take stock of your workspace. The dye vat, low and nearly empty. The mordant tub, still warm, still faintly shimmering. The snail refuse pile, huge, slightly buzzing, but beside it, hanging like the robes of gods, are your finished textiles. They are not just dyed, they are transformed, and so are you. You did not just make color, you made permanence. You made something that can be worn into ceremony, carried into burial, passed through generations. Your hands are cracked, your shoulders ache. You have not stopped smelling like tidal rot since Tuesday, but you step back and look at what you have made, and for the first time, you understand why this process endured for over 1,000 years. Tomorrow, you clean up, you organize, you begin preparing for the hardest part yet, selling this stuff without anyone stealing your secrets. You rise before dawn, stretching sore arms and flexing fingers still stiff from yesterday's labor. Outside, the air is cool, and mist curls along the rooftops. Your purple dyed wool hangs like ghostly banners, barely stirring. Today is not for dyeing. Today is for secrecy. You see, making the dye is only half the game. Selling it? That is a whole other battle. Because medieval dyeing, especially Tyrian or imperial purple, is not just a craft. It is a guarded trade, laced with espionage, guild protection, and sometimes, well, straight up sabotage. You wrap your dyed wool carefully in cloth, disguising it as plain textiles. You cannot just parade it through town glowing like royal treasure. Someone might snatch it, or worse, demand to know your process. Guilds in cities like London, Bruges, and Avignon were notoriously tight-lipped. Reveal your recipe outside the circle, and you could be fined, banned, or invited on a suspiciously long fishing trip from which you do not return. So you play it safe. You carry the bundles under a rough cloak, passing through muddy streets and crowded stalls. The market is buzzing. Chickens scream from cages. Bread vendors bark out deals. And everyone wants something, but not too many are selling purple. It is rare, exotic, dangerous even. You stop at a small stall run by a cloth merchant you trust. Barely. You slip one bundle out and let him peek. His eyebrows rise. That is real? He whispers. You nod, saying nothing. He touches the fabric like it might bite him. Where? He asks. You shrug. Let him guess. Here is a mainstream fact you will enjoy. During the Roman and Byzantine periods, the production of purple was centralized and tightly controlled. Entire workshops were run under imperial supervision, with laws dictating who could produce, wear, and sell the color. Some regions, like Tyre and Sidon, became legendary hubs for this very reason. Even in medieval Europe, echoes of that control remained. Certain cities tried to keep the snail dyeing process a local monopoly. They would ban exports of raw dye, restrict apprenticeships, and limit who could legally purchase the final product. And just to make it spicy, some rulers went so far as to inspect guild members' hens. If yours were not stained from real work, your credentials were revoked. You strike a deal with the merchant. 3 coins per length of fabric. A fair rate, though your pride whispers it should be more. Still, coin is coin, and it helps fund the next round of snails. And you will need more. Oh yes, always more. The purple beast is never satisfied. Want a weird tidbit? In one 14th century text from the coastal city of Amalfi, there is a warning against purple dye imposters. Apparently, a few clever fraudsters soaked ordinary wool in wine lees, beet juice, and iron shavings, then tried to pass it off as snail-dyed. Under candlelight, it could almost fool the eye, until the rain came. Then it all washed out, like cheap makeup. Historians still argue whether this was common enough to warrant laws, or just a folktale to keep customers cautious. Either way, you make a mental note: never sell under a leaking roof. Back in your workshop, you start tidying. That means cleaning the vats, sweeping snail shells, and boiling water for future batches. You organize your tools, stirring rods, cloth hooks, mordant pots. You write down a few notes in your rough ledger. No details, just symbols. If someone ever finds this book, let them wonder what the little squid-shaped glyphs mean. Your apprentice stumbles in late, wiping sleep from his eyes, and mumbling about dreams involving purple clouds and exploding snails. You hand him a broom and point to the shell pile. He groans, but starts sweeping. You chuckle. He has no idea what he is becoming, or how far this trade can take him if he survives the smell. You glance at the remaining dye fluid, now weaker, but still usable. You will need to refresh it soon. That means more snails, more fermentation, more late nights muttering to buckets like a lunatic wizard, but also more fabric that makes people's jaws drop, more conversations where you get to say, yes, that is real purple. No, you cannot afford it. You take one strip of wool, your best one, and tuck it into your chest. Not for sale. That one is yours. A reminder of what you have learned, what you have earned. A flash of defiance in a world that still thinks color is just color. And as you sit beside your drying rack, watching the purple shimmer in the morning light, you allow yourself one tiny indulgence. You imagine a future where someone wears your work to a coronation, where your cloth brushes the cold stone of a cathedral floor, where, centuries from now, a scholar stares at a faded strip in a museum and whispers, "Snails? Seriously? Yes, seriously." The days roll on, and the rhythm of the dye house begins to pulse in your bones. You catch yourself measuring scoops of sea salt without looking, sniffing fermentation jars with expert squints, and saying cryptic things like, "It smells ripe today. That's good." You do not even realize you are becoming one of them, one of those dyers, the ones who speak in purple. But do not get too comfortable, because now you are expanding your empire. You are not just dyeing wool anymore. Word has spread subtly, cautiously, that someone nearby is producing the good stuff, the deep, rich, snail-born purple. And now, linen and silk merchants are appearing at your door, each of them smiling with those polite, predatory merchant smiles, each of them whispering, "Could you, maybe, try it on our fabric too?" That is today's task. Experimentation. You hang up your wool bundles with a sigh and lay out sheets of linen and lengths of imported silk. Very fancy, very delicate, and very annoying. Because unlike wool, which is thick, absorbent, and naturally rich with lanolin, linen, and silk are sumps. Linen repels dyes, like a grumpy cat avoiding a bath. Silk, on the other hand, slurps up color like it was born for it, but bruises easily and hates rough handling. Your first step? Adjust the mordant. Remember your trusty alum? Well, with silk, too much will make the fabric stiff. Too little, and the color will look like it was applied by a drunken fairy. So you dilute it. Add rose water, maybe. Not for magic, just to soften the scent and pH. Or maybe for magic. At this point, who knows anymore? You soak the silk slowly, folding it like paper fans, so the fabric moves through the liquid without creasing. If it wrinkles, the dye will pool unevenly. Ever seen tie-dye at a Renaissance fair? That is what happens when a dyer sneezes during silk prep. Linen is even trickier. You have to beat it a little. Literally. Linen is made from flax fibers, and it is more tightly woven than wool. To open it up, you soak it longer, sometimes days, with intermittent stretching and thwacking. Yes, medieval people beat their laundry on purpose. There are whole guild records about the best way to bruise linen for better dye absorption. Here is your mainstream fact for this section. By the 12th century, silk dyeing had become a specialized profession in many parts of Europe, especially in Italian cities like Lucca and Venice. These dye houses developed slightly different techniques from wool dyers, often importing methods from the Islamic world and Byzantine Empire. Some even guarded their silk formulas more fiercely than state secrets. And now you are here, juggling wool, silk, and linen like a medieval alchemist. You lower the fabrics into the cooled snail vat, watching carefully. The wool immediately darkens. Classic overachiever. Silk begins to shift with a slow, luminous gleam, like oil across glass. Linen just floats there, being difficult. You poke it, it bobs. You sigh. After a while, the colors begin to set. The silk turns a velvety violet, rich and smooth. The linen, stubborn beast, only shows a pale plum. Still, it is something. You rinse each piece gently. The silk whispers against your fingers. The linen protests with a scratchy shrug. You hang them to dry beside the wool, and the trio flutters like a strange flag, one that says, "Do not ask how this was made, unless you are willing to be lied to." Want a quirky tidbit? In parts of medieval Persia, some dyers refused to speak while handling silk, believing human breath would ruin the fabric's sheen. They would wear masks or simply work in silence, communicating only with nods. Was it superstition or a rudimentary form of quality control? Historians still argue whether this practice came from religious purity codes, misunderstood science, or just a collective desire to avoid small talk. Back in your workshop, your apprentice gawks at the silk's transformation. "Can I touch it?" he asks. You pause, then hand him the linen instead. "Touch this first." As evening falls, you light a small oil lamp and inspect the dried results. The wool is, as always, perfect. The silk is exquisite, good enough for a duchess, or maybe an assassin pretending to be one. The linen is usable, not regal, but serviceable. You could sell it to clergy, lower nobles, or very rich merchants trying to impress each other. You make more notes in your ledger. This time, you draw a tiny squid next to the silk recipe. A tiny squid with a crown, for obvious reasons. And then you sit back, exhale, and sip a mug of warm wine. You are not just a dyer anymore. You are a fabric whisperer. You understand the moods of cloth, the way each weave responds to color, to time, to care. You do not just make purple. You make stories that drape over shoulders and march into banquets. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will try leather or feathers. You shudder, maybe not, but tonight you bask in your little gallery of dyed cloth, each one whispering of snails, sea winds, and the alchemy of patience. Your fingers itch with ambition. It has been weeks since you first dared to dye silk, and now your workshop smells not just of brine and snail goo, but also of candle wax, charred rosemary, and something else, something like confidence. You have begun to think like a colorist, not just a dyer. No, a colorist. The difference? A dyer follows a recipe. A colorist manipulates it, like a chef who knows when to ignore the cookbook and just trust the sauce. Today's obsession is intensity. See, you want deeper purple, not just violet, not mauve or lavender. You want the kind of color that makes people gasp, that steals the breath right from their chests, the kind that emperors would sell provinces for. But how? The answer lies in layering. Instead of relying on a single dip in the snail vat, you begin experimenting with multiple soaks, each one followed by a rinse, then a dry, then another plunge. It is maddeningly slow. You spend entire days coaxing one strip of wool into richer and richer hues, like painting the sky with a single brush. Some pieces go through 6, 7, even 10 dye cycles. The results? Otherworldly. So deep they are almost black, yet shimmer with that iridescent violet glow whenever the light hits. You hold one up to the lamp and whisper, "This is it. This is the dream." But all dreams come at a price. Multiple dye cycles mean multiple snail extractions, which means more snails. So many snails. Your apprentice jokes that he will start seeing them in his sleep, marching in tiny ranks, demanding a union. You start organizing your snail shells by size. The little ones for delicate dyes, the big bruisers for bulk batches. You find yourself talking to them. You with the chipped shell, yes, you. You are coming with me. Here is your mainstream fact for this section. Roman historians noted that a single garment dyed with true Tyrian purple could require over 12,000 snails. This statistic was often repeated throughout the Middle Ages, sometimes inflated, sometimes downplayed, but always to convey the same thing. Snail dye was absurdly labor-intensive, and yet you persist, because once you have seen the way a 10-dip wool sheet glows under moonlight, it becomes hard to settle for anything less. You get picky. You start rejecting fabrics that will not hold the soul of the color. You make dramatic pronouncements like, "This linen has no poetry," while your apprentice rolls his eyes in the background. One day, while testing an 11th dip on a silk panel, you accidentally leave it soaking too long. When you retrieve it, you panic. It is darker than ever, almost maroon, almost bruised. But once it dries, something astonishing happens. The fabric has turned a regal, smoky hue, nearly black, but with flashes of purple in every fold. You show it to a merchant the next day, and he goes silent for a full minute before whispering, "I will give you double." You say nothing, but you do not blink. Want a quirky tidbit? In the 13th century, some dyers in southern France swore by a triple moon method, dyeing fabrics on the full moon, waxing moon, and waning moon, claiming the lunar cycle affected the dye's depth. Were they proto-scientists or just medieval romantics? Historians still argue whether these lunar traditions had any chemical basis or were just poetic scheduling. Your apprentice insists it is nonsense. Then, the next morning, you catch him checking the moon phase on a scrap of parchment. You say nothing, just nod sagely. The layering technique becomes your trademark. Word spreads, not loudly, but like a warm ripple across still water. You get commissions now, private ones. Wealthy widows wanting mourning shawls, guild masters ordering ceremonial robes. Even a nobleman who arrives with 2 guards lays a bag of gold on your table and says, "Make something no one else can copy." You nod, already thinking, multiple dips, mordant variations, maybe even co-dye with walnut husks. It becomes clear that the true luxury of medieval purple is not just its rarity, it is its depth. its complexity, that impossible richness, that whispers of the sea, the sun, and secrets buried in fermentation jars. You spend more and more time in silence now, not out of fatigue, but focus. You run cloth through your fingers with the reverence of a monk turning a holy page, and you realize something important. You are not just making fabric anymore. You are making power. Because when people wear your purple, they carry more than dye. They carry your choices, your experiments, your hours, your failures, and your victories. They carry your story, even if they never know it. You awake to a new challenge: storage. Because dyeing fabric with snails is not just about color and cloth. It is about timing, temperature, and above all, patience. The purple you create today is fragile. It can fade, stain, or worse, spoil if not handled with care. And in a medieval town, without climate control, that is a serious headache. So you turn your attention to the perfect preservation. You begin with the basics. After rinsing, fabric must dry slowly, ideally in shaded, airy rooms. Direct sun will bleach it out, and damp air will encourage mold, turning your prized purple into a sad, muddy mess. You construct racks from cedar wood, known for its subtle anti-mold properties. The wood smells faintly of pine forests and reminds you of long hikes, which is a welcome distraction from the snail scent. Once dry, the fabric needs to be stored away from light and moisture. You sew simple linen bags, natural and breathable, to wrap each bundle. These are stacked carefully in chests lined with fragrant herbs like lavender and rosemary. You have learned the hard way that a single flea infestation can destroy weeks of work. And here is a practical fact for you. Medieval dye merchants often rented special color chambers within city walls, small, cool rooms designed specifically for storing expensive dyed cloth. These rooms were guarded and locked, sometimes requiring multiple keys to open to prevent theft and accidental damage. But storage is only part of the puzzle. You also have to consider transport. You cannot simply throw your purple bundles into a cart alongside sacks of grain or barrels of wine. That would invite disaster. So you commission leather cases lined with straw padding. They smell earthy and slightly of horses, but they protect. You have a standing joke with your apprentice. If the purple cloth ever looks like it rode through a battlefield, it did. As shipments prepare, you start practicing your sales pitch. Because in the medieval marketplace, you do not just sell fabric. You sell a story. You sell exclusivity. You sell status. You imagine standing before a wealthy noble or a royal official. You would show them the sheen, the depth, the story behind every thread. You would whisper about the thousands of snails, the secret fermentation, the alchemical patience. You would let them feel the weight of power in their fingers. And of course, you would remind them, no one else has this, not even the king's dyers. Now, a quirky medieval detail for you. Some merchants added tiny slips of parchment with cryptic symbols into their cloth bundles. These were early branding marks, meant to prove authenticity and deter counterfeiters. One merchant's mark resembled a small snail, curled in an eternal spiral. Clever, right? Historians still argue whether these marks were genuinely effective or just another layer of merchant superstition. Later, you practice wrapping bundles carefully, testing the smell of herbs, inspecting the softness, and adjusting the packing materials. Your apprentice, ever curious, asks if anyone ever steals purple cloth. You laugh and say, if they do, they better run faster than a bishop chasing a heretic by late afternoon. You stand by the workshop door, watching as your first shipment sets off. You feel a flutter of pride mixed with anxiety. These bundles carry more than cloth. They carry your sweat, your secrets, and your dreams. You breathe deeply, savoring the salty sea air mingling with cedar and wine. And then you turn back to the vats, because there will always be more snails to catch, more fabric to dye, and more purple to create. The alchemy never ends. By now, your workshop has settled into a steady hum, a symphony of bubbling vats, dripping cloth, and the occasional grumble of your apprentice's stomach. You are deep into the medieval dyeing game, but suddenly, a new question nags you. What about colors beyond purple? After all, the snail dye, while legendary, is just one star in the vast sky of medieval hues. What about blues, reds, greens, and those elusive yellows? You are curious. You want to understand how purple fits into the grand palette. So today, you embark on a mini research quest. You start with blue, the color of the heavens, the Virgin Mary's cloak, and a symbol of nobility in many regions. Medieval dyers often relied on woad, a plant that grows wild and stubborn, especially in cooler climates. Extracting blue from woad requires a different alchemical dance: fermentation, oxygen deprivation, and a lot of patience. You sneak a whiff near the woad vat. It smells like sweaty socks and cabbage. Charming. But the blue it produces is a brilliant, sharp color, perfect for adding contrast to your purple fabrics. You imagine mixing the two colors, experimenting with layering, or even resist dyeing techniques. Red, you discover, is a whole other saga. Madder root is king here, gritty, earthy, and surprisingly persistent. You watch as your apprentice crushes roots into powder, marveling at the transformation from dull brown to vibrant crimson after hours of boiling. You wonder if mixing red with purple might create a deeper burgundy, or if it would simply sully your precious snail dye. Green is trickier, often a blend of yellow and blue dyes. Weld plants for yellow, woad for blue. You try blending fabrics, watching the colors bleed and blend in ways both predictable and surprising. The medieval dyers were part scientists, part artists, and part sorcerers, crafting colors from the very essence of the earth. Here is a historical fact for you. The medieval guild system often divided dyers by color specialty. Some focused only on blues, others on reds or yellows, and only a few mastered the rare purples. This specialization led to highly secretive communities, each jealously guarding their recipes. Now for a quirky tidbit. In some parts of Europe, green dye was so unstable that dyed garments would change color dramatically with weather and washing, sometimes from a bright green to a sickly yellow or even brown. Medieval peasants joked that green clothes were alive, and some believed they could curse or bless the wearer. Historians still debate whether the unpredictability of medieval dyes influenced fashion trends or even social customs around clothing disposal and recycling. You muse on all this, thinking how your snail purple fits into the colorful chaos of medieval textiles, rare, expensive, and forever desired. You pour yourself a cup of herbal tea and lean back, eyes heavy, but mind buzzing with new possibilities. Tomorrow, you decide you will try mixing a little madder into the snail vat. Just a whisper. Maybe it will unlock a new shade, one that tells a new story. Or maybe it will ruin everything. But that is the fun of it. You wake to the faint smell of salt air and the buzzing anticipation of a new experiment. Today, you decide to push boundaries, to play with the chemistry of the snail dye in ways no dyer before you dared. You remember the idea from yesterday, blending madder roots red magic into your precious purple vat. Just a tiny pinch, just to see what happens. After all, medieval artisans loved their bold experiments, even if most ended in disaster. You carefully prepare a small batch, the madder root, crushed to a fine powder, swirls in the water with a muddy red hue. Your apprentice watches wide-eyed as you add it drop by drop to the snail vat, which shimmers with deep violet beneath its oily surface. The mixture bubbles quietly, colors mingling like strangers at a party. You wait, hoping for a spark of magic. Hours pass. You check the fabric repeatedly, dipping strips of wool, linen, and silk. The results are surprising. The purple darkens, taking on a warm burgundy undertone. The silk glows with a mysterious richness, while the wool feels heavier, almost regal. You realize you are onto something, a subtle variation that might become a new signature shade. But with innovation comes risk. Some fabrics reject the hybrid dye altogether, their fibers stiffening or fading strangely. You are reminded why medieval dyers were cautious about mixing their mysteries. Guilds had strict rules about unauthorized recipes, and breaking them could mean fines or worse. Here is a mainstream historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, many European dyeing guilds strictly regulated dye formulas to maintain quality and control. Unauthorized mixing or secret recipes were sometimes punished to protect the guild's reputation and economic power. Yet you feel exhilarated, balancing on the edge of discovery and disaster. For a quirky tidbit, you recall a legend from southern Italy about purple witches, dyers rumored to add secret herbs to their vats, believed to curse rival merchants or bless favored patrons. Whether fact or folklore, these tales reflect the mystique surrounding purple dye. Historians still argue whether such stories were mere superstition or veiled accounts of early chemical experimentation. You finish the day documenting every detail in your ledger, sketching color swatches, and noting fabric reactions. Your apprentice, brimming with questions, asks if this new shade could replace the old. You smile softly, knowing that in the world of dyeing, evolution is endless, just like the snail's slow, secret work beneath the sea. You dim the lamps, letting the day's colors fade into memory, already dreaming of tomorrow's alchemy. The weeks roll by, and your workshop becomes a laboratory of endless curiosity. You begin to notice patterns, not just in color, but in the very nature of the snails and the dye they produce. One morning, your apprentice rushes in, clutching a rough parchment with a crudely drawn map. "Look," he says, "the snails near the river mouth seem different from those by the rocky shore." Intrigued, you decide to explore this microgeography. You organize small expeditions to collect snails from different coastal zones, mudflats, rocky beaches, and sandy coves. Back at the workshop, you prepare vats from each batch, dyeing small cloth samples and comparing results. To your amazement, the colors differ subtly, but noticeably. Snails from rocky areas yield a richer, darker purple, while those from muddy shores produce a paler, more reddish hue. This discovery sparks a new obsession: terroir, the idea that place shapes flavor, and in your case, color. You begin to think of your purple not just as purple, but as the signature of the sea, each shade telling a story of salt, stone, and sun. This ties into a fascinating historical fact. Medieval dyers and merchants sometimes distinguished Tyrian purple based on its geographical source, with dyes from certain ports commanding higher prices. The concept of regional flavors in dye was early evidence of branding and quality control. Your apprentice jokes, "Are we dye sommeliers now?" You laugh, but secretly enjoy the comparison. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some coastal dyers believed snails harvested on particular saints' feast days produced holy purple, imbued with spiritual power. Whether ritual or marketing, these beliefs added mystique and often inflated prices. Historians still argue whether these Saint Day collections were practical harvests timed with snail reproduction cycles or simply folklore woven into commerce. Inspired, you start labeling your fabrics with their snail origin, creating a mini catalog of purple nuances. Merchants are intrigued, customers even more so. The complexity of your craft deepens. The snails, once anonymous, become partners in your art. You spend evenings by the fire, reflecting on how the sea's secret creatures shape every thread you dye, every shade you dream. The journey of purple is no longer just a process. It is a conversation with nature. Your experiments with snail origin lead you to an even more intricate web of medieval trade and politics. You soon realize that the story of purple dye is not just about color, it is about power, economics, and sometimes outright espionage. One afternoon, a grizzled merchant from the eastern Mediterranean arrives at your door. His eyes gleam with secret knowledge as he speaks of rare snails found in faraway waters, snails that produce a dye even richer, more coveted than your local variety. You listen carefully. He talks of Phoenician traders who guarded their dyeing secrets fiercely, and of rival kingdoms vying for control of dye-producing coasts. Purple was a commodity that shaped alliances and wars. You realize your workshop sits at the crossroads of this ancient struggle. Every batch of dye you make is connected to a vast network of sailors, merchants, and spies. Here is a mainstream fact. The famous Tyrian purple dye originated in Phoenicia, and for centuries the production sites were closely guarded state secrets, fueling economic monopolies and diplomatic intrigue. You begin to wonder how much of your own work depends on these hidden histories. How many secrets lie beneath your vats, hidden in salt and snail slime? A quirky tidbit you discover. Medieval European rulers sometimes sent spies disguised as merchants to Mediterranean ports to learn the secrets of purple dye production. Some of these agents returned with elaborate false beards and coded recipes scribbled on tiny parchment scrolls. Historians still argue how much actual espionage influenced dye technology transfer versus gradual trade and cultural exchange. Inspired, you write a secret symbol into your workshop ledger, a tiny snail shell entwined with a ship's anchor, a nod to this hidden world of trade and secrecy. Your apprentice asks if you fear rival dyers stealing your methods. You smile and say, "In this game, everyone's a spy, but we hold the best secrets." As night falls, you gaze out over the harbor, imagining the long, winding journey your snail's dye has taken from ancient Phoenician shores to your hands, to your cloth. You realize that the medieval process of dyeing fabric with snails is not just a craft. It is a living story of human ambition, mystery, and connection. And it is far from over. You find yourself drawn into the rituals surrounding the wearing of purple cloth. It is one thing to dye the fabric, but an entirely different matter to understand its place in medieval society's complex tapestry of power and symbolism. You imagine a noblewoman slipping into a gown dyed with your snail's precious pigment. The fabric catches the candlelight, shimmering with a subtle, otherworldly glow. To her, it is not just clothing. It is a statement of status, wealth, even divine favor. You recall that in many medieval societies, sumptuary laws strictly controlled who could wear purple. Kings and high-ranking clergy had exclusive rights. Wearing purple without permission was a punishable offense, sometimes even considered treason. Here is a historical fact. The Roman Empire famously restricted purple dye to emperors, a tradition echoed and adapted throughout the Middle Ages in Europe. Purple became synonymous with imperial and ecclesiastical authority. You also uncover a quirky medieval practice. Some royals wore false purple, cheaper dyes meant to mimic Tyrian purple's majesty. These substitutes sometimes faded or turned greenish, causing great embarrassment at court. It seems that even medieval fashion had its versions of knockoffs. Historians still debate whether sumptuary laws were strictly enforced or mainly symbolic gestures by rulers trying to assert control over growing urban populations. You imagine the tension of a merchant secretly selling purple fabric to a wealthy but unofficial customer, the thrill of risk, the chance of ruin or fortune. You begin to wonder about the stories your purple cloth could tell if it had a voice. Tales of forbidden lovers dressed in illicit purple, of secret meetings behind castle walls, of silent rebellion woven into threads. Your apprentice chuckles. Maybe the purple is magic after all. You smile, knowing that every piece of dyed fabric carries the weight of history, power, and sometimes a little bit of scandal. As you prepare another batch of dye, You reflect on how the color's journey is as much about people as it is about snails and vats. And in the quiet of your workshop, the alchemy of purple continues, quietly shaping medieval dreams and dramas alike. The seasons shift outside your workshop windows, and with the passing months, you become increasingly aware of the environmental challenges tied to your craft. Dyeing with snails is a delicate balance, not just chemically, but ecologically. You recall the countless hours spent collecting snails along rocky shores and shallow waters. The snails, once abundant, are now harder to find. Coastal changes, overharvesting, and shifting tides begin to bite into your supply. You wonder if the snails sense the pressure, if their populations ebb and flow like the tides themselves. This delicate marine dance affects your entire operation. Medieval records show similar concerns. Some coastal towns reported shortages of purple-producing snails, prompting restrictions on harvesting or the search for alternative sources. Overharvesting threatened not only dye production, but also local ecosystems. You think about how your medieval ancestors likely understood sustainability in their own way, balancing harvests with nature's rhythms, perhaps out of necessity rather than foresight. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some dyers kept snail gardens, small enclosed pools near the sea where they bred snails to ensure a steady supply. These pools required constant care, fresh seawater, and even music, as legend had it that snails produced richer dye when exposed to certain sounds. Historians still argue how widespread these practices were, or if they were isolated curiosities of a few obsessed dyers. You begin planning a similar snail garden, imagining it as a living extension of your workshop, part science lab, part aquarium, part shrine to your slow, slippery muse. The idea feels comforting amid the unpredictability of medieval trade routes, politics, and market demands. Here, you can exert some control, nurture your tiny allies, and secure the future of your purple. Your apprentice, skeptical but amused, asks if the snails will appreciate the music. You laugh, promising a medieval playlist, lutes, flutes, and maybe a chant or two. As twilight descends, you stand by the shore listening to the waves, pondering the unseen, interconnected world beneath the water's surface, the world that gives you your rarest colors and your deepest inspiration. The medieval process of dyeing fabric with snails is not just a craft. It is an ecological story, a fragile partnership with nature's slow alchemists. And that story continues, quietly, endlessly. Your snail garden is flourishing, the small pools shimmering under the afternoon sun like secret treasures. Watching the snails crawl languidly over the stones, you reflect on how their slow pace mirrors the entire medieval dyeing process, a patience-demanding craft that rewards diligence more than haste. You decide to dive deeper into the medieval dyeing techniques themselves, focusing on the actual fabric preparation. Dyeing is not just about the snail's secret pigment. It is about how the fabric embraces it. You start with wool, the most common textile in medieval Europe. The fibers need to be carefully cleaned, carded, and prepared to absorb the dye evenly. You notice how impurities in the wool can cause blotchy patches, ruining hours of work. Next comes linen and silk, each demanding unique handling. Silk's delicate sheen challenges you to preserve its lustrous quality while infusing it with rich color. Linen's coarser texture soaks up the dye differently, requiring multiple dips and longer soaking. This stage, preparing the fabric, is as crucial as the dye itself. Medieval dyers often spent days washing and treating textiles before the first dip. You feel respect growing for these overlooked artisans, whose touch shaped every royal robe and humble tunic. Here's a mainstream fact. Medieval dye workshops often included specialized fullers who prepared and cleaned cloth using natural detergents like urine or fuller's earth, ensuring textiles were ready for dye absorption. You chuckle remembering how the fuller's work often smelled worse than the snail vats, yet their contribution was vital. A quirky tidbit. Some dyers believed that washing fabric in river water under a full moon improved dye uptake. Whether science or superstition, such rituals added a mystical layer to the craft. Historians still debate how much these ritual practices affected dye quality versus their role in community bonding and tradition. You end the day dipping cloth in your snail dye, feeling the cool fabric soak up the purple, imagining it becoming the prized garment of a noble lord or a clandestine rebel. The medieval process of dyeing fabric with snails is no simple task. It is an artful negotiation between nature, craft, and a little bit of magic. You smile, watching your apprentice carefully hang the dyed cloth to dry, the purple glinting like twilight. As you hang the freshly dyed purple cloth to dry, your mind drifts to the final, often overlooked step, the finishing touches that transform dyed fabric into wearable art. You know that color alone does not make a garment. Texture, softness, and durability matter just as much. Medieval dyers and tailors worked closely to ensure that the dyed cloth met the highest standards of their elite clientele. You inspect the cloth, running your fingers over its surface. The snail dye, rich and vivid, has bonded well, but the fabric still feels stiff. You remember that fulling, the process of beating and washing the cloth, softens fibers and tightens the weave. You imagine the workshop full of rhythmic pounding sounds as fullers labor to transform rough cloth into smooth, durable fabric ready for royal courts. To set the dye and improve color fastness, you add mordants, natural substances like alum or iron salts, carefully balancing their amounts to avoid dulling the precious purple. This technical dance between dye and mordant fascinates you. Too little, and the color washes out. Too much, and the fabric darkens or weakens. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval dyers frequently used alum as a mordant, which helped fix dyes to fabric and made colors more vibrant and lasting. Alum mining and trade were important economic activities in certain regions. Here is a quirky tidbit. Some dyers claim that horse urine made an excellent mordant, leading to some rather pungent workshops. You smile at the thought, realizing your own sniff tests are surprisingly mild by comparison. Historians still debate how consistently mordant recipes were used across different regions and social classes. with some arguing that wealthy patrons could afford better quality mordants, while peasants relied on makeshift solutions. You decide to test a few experimental mordant blends on your dyed cloth, eager to discover subtle effects. As twilight deepens, you hang your samples to dry, the purple fabric catching the fading light like whispers of a bygone era. You feel the centuries-old connection between craftsman and nature, the enduring magic of color, chemistry, and human patience woven into every thread. The medieval process of dyeing fabric with snails is finally, truly coming alive before your eyes. With the cloth dyed, mordanted, and dried, your thoughts turn to the final journey, selling and distributing your precious purple fabric. This stage is as crucial as the dyeing itself, shaping the fate of your craft and the reach of your color. You envision bustling medieval markets, stalls crowded with bolts of cloth in every hue imaginable. Among them, your purple cloth stands out, rich, rare, and coveted. But selling purple fabric is no simple business. Guilds control who can trade these luxury goods, and taxes and tariffs gnaw at profits. Political alliances and wars disrupt trade routes, making supply unpredictable. You realize that medieval dyers often depended on powerful patrons, nobles, bishops, or wealthy merchants who could guarantee a market and protect against rivals. Here is a mainstream historical fact. In many medieval cities, guilds regulated the production and sale of dyed cloth, including strict quality controls and limits on who could market purple fabric, keeping prices high and quality consistent. You chuckle, imagining a guild official inspecting your workshop with a stern eye, clipboard in hand, ensuring no rogue recipes or inferior dyes slip past. A quirky tidbit: some medieval buyers tested purple cloth by rubbing it with lemon juice or vinegar. If the color changed or faded, it was deemed fake or low quality. You recall hearing of secret color tests that only true connoisseurs knew. Historians still argue how widespread these tests were, and whether they served as genuine quality assurance or simply as trade rituals. You think about how your dyed fabric might travel from your workshop to a merchant ship, then across kingdoms, finally reaching a noble's wardrobe. The journey from snail to sleeve is long and fraught with obstacles, but it is what gives purple its mystique and value. As you carefully roll the finished cloth, ready for the next step in its life, you feel a deep satisfaction. The medieval process of dyeing fabric with snails is more than just chemistry. It is a tale of trade, trust, and transformation stitched into every fold. As your final batches of purple fabric roll off the loom, you reflect on the long, winding journey that brought you here, the patient harvesting, the smelly vats, the careful dyeing, the rituals, the politics, the mysteries. This color, born in tiny sea snails, is no mere pigment. It is a symbol, a treasure, a mark of power and prestige across medieval worlds. You feel the weight of history on your shoulders, the countless artisans who came before you, the secrets they guarded, the hands that wore your cloth. You know the process is slow, demanding, sometimes frustrating, but always rewarding. Every drop of dye carries stories, of nature's alchemy, human ingenuity, and the endless quest to turn ordinary fabric into something extraordinary. The color you have created today will adorn kings, queens, priests, and rebels. It will survive generations, fading and reviving in tales and textiles. Historians still debate many details, the exact recipes, the origins of certain techniques, the symbolic meanings that shifted over centuries. But one truth remains. The medieval process of dyeing fabric with snails was a remarkable blend of art, science, and commerce. And now, as you close your workshop for the night, you savor the quiet magic you have helped weave. The snails rest in their pools, the vats cool and silent, and the purple cloth glows softly in the moonlight, a jewel born from the sea, the earth, and human hands. You smile, knowing that this ancient craft, with all its quirks and mysteries, will continue to inspire wonder for centuries to come. Now, as the day draws to a close and your workshop falls into calm silence, imagine the soft murmur of waves against the shore where your snail friends rest. The scent of salty air mingles gently with the faint hint of lavender from your drying cloth, wrapping around you like a comforting blanket. Let your thoughts slow, your breath deepen, and your mind drift along the gentle currents of history. You have journeyed far, not through grand battles or royal intrigues, but through the quiet, patient labor of color and craft, where every step matters and every moment is stitched with care. In this moment, the vibrant purples fade softly to dusky hues, reminding you that all things transform, sometimes slowly, sometimes subtly, but always inevitably, like the snails that carry their precious pigment within. So too do we carry within us small treasures, memories, skills, stories that color our lives in ways both seen and unseen. Rest now, knowing that the legacy of purple is not just in the cloth, but in the hands that made it, the people who wore it, and the whispers of the sea that still echo through time. Sleep gently, wrapped in the quiet wonder of a craft that connects past and present, nature and human artifice, in a tapestry as rich and mysterious as the color itself. Sweet dreams.